everybody. Welcome to Holy Foley. I'm Dr. Vanessa Theme Ament, and my guest today is Kylee Pena, who is a product marketing manager for professional editorial at Adobe. Kylie's also a member of the Society of Motion Picture and Television Engineers, known to a lot of us as SMPTE. That's where she has been involved with motion picture sound, which is the engineering site. But what's interesting is she really likes to think about it not in terms of technology. She's also involved in a lot of other organizations, and she's one of those real doers who gets involved with lots of different aspects of the media. So we'll talk about that. She's also interested in empowering creativity by giving people more access to new ways of unleashing their creativity. And we're going to talk about that too. So welcome, Kylee. I'm really glad to be able to talk with you. Let's start with, we briefly discussed this before, but I knew you because of our connection both to Indiana, because you're from Indiana and I was at Ball State. And I know you'd done some color correcting, and I know you'd done some editorial, and you'd done sound. And my understanding is that you got interested in sound through editorial and had kind of a backward trajectory into it. I'd like to hear about that journey and what your experiences were as picture editorial, going into sound, color correcting, all of that, as we talk about sound here, if you wouldn't mind starting there.
Absolutely. Yes, from Indiana. I went to IUPUI, which is now Indiana University, Indianapolis. And when I arrived there, I was already a huge video production nerd. I taught myself how to capture from tape. This is a time when YouTube didn't exist, so I was sharing videos on discs to my friends in high school. I was all about the moving picture part of it, and the sound kind of just followed. At the time, 2001, 2002, there were not really very good tools for noise reduction that were at least accessible by, younger people. I was using a lot of hacks and things just to make it work. So I was really confident that this was the path I wanted to go down when I arrived to university. And then I took my first sound class and I was humbled because one of the first things our professor did was say, you're going to record and edit footsteps. And I was like, it's a freaking footstep, what's the deal? And it was really hard. He's like, yeah, it's going to take us 2 weeks because recording a footstep and then making it sound correct is really difficult.
Yeah.
So through the process of live recording and then using practical sound effects, I really got to understand the nature of layering sound as part of the storytelling. And then that evolved more into, we were doing Foley just with stuff we had. We had to bring in things because we didn't have a Foley stage. And then processing them with different effects, like breaking spaghetti plus this other processor sounds like electricity, like things that make no sense, but also kind of make sense.
Mm-hmm.
So all of that was the one part of university where I was like, wow, I have no idea what I'm doing, but I have to try really hard. And so I kind of just kept going from there and really, over time realized how much sound can push the story forward, but also how much you can hold it back.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah. It's a huge distraction if it's terrible.
Uh-huh.
Or if it's even just a little bit bad, it's a huge distraction.
Mm-hmm. Or if it's too much, or if it's too loud,
Mm-hmm.
or if it draws attention to itself and takes away from the story.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. The mixing part of making it all kind of make sense was also really challenging to me. And I really gained an appreciation for that through the process of having to learn it, but then also just then after gaining the hands-on, then appreciating it in films where it was done very handily. Like I remember watching The Social Network for the first time, and they're in a really loud bar, but the dialogue is perfectly clear, but they're still yelling like you would be at a bar. And
Right.
I was like, dang, how'd they do that? I don't even, it's all very magical to me still.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's interesting. People who really know what they're doing in production sound.
Mm,
So the production
mhm.
mixture, knowing that they're going to need to sound like they're yelling, even though there's really nothing happening on set, because they
Yeah.
have to have the background walla filling
Mhm.
in with background loop groups, which is something I did, was get together the background voice actors to fill in,
Mhm.
is something that only the really seasoned professionals know. But when it's done right and mixed right, it really does sound like it's actually happening right there. But there's so much to sound. And when you work in
Yeah.
picture, you learn more and more and more how much the picture editorial and the sound editorial work together to create this magical, seamless reality that a lot of people the actors in production, a lot of people on set have no idea happens.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's really interesting when you get a little bit more of an expert ear and you're able to detect, oh, that was probably ADR, or you look at a shot and you're like, there's no way they could get production sound on that, but it
Yeah.
sounds like it's very natural. When
Mhm.
you start to kind of see those things, and I kind of gained that more when I was working in technology, especially in dailies, seeing the raw stuff from set and thinking either, wow, this is a really talented production sound mixer, or wow, they're going to have fun in ADR trying to match that up.
Yeah.
So, you gain an appreciation and understanding, but you're like, most people, those little things kind of float by, and there is so much layering that goes in. So to be able to have all the tools to kind of meld all that together is really important.
Now, I have a couple of questions about two things that you've been involved with in the past, one that you're still involved with because it
Mhm.
adds to the flavor of where you are now. So the first thing I want to ask is, why did you get involved with SMPTE?
Mm. I got involved with SMPTE originally because I because I wanted to stir the pot. I knew that SMPTE was really important, but every communication I got from them was just a whole bunch of old white guys. And I was like, I
Yeah.
feel like the people that are making the standards that we run on should come from many different perspectives. Um, Race and gender, but certainly, but different walks of life. So I wanted to get involved in order to bring my perspective and make it safer for others to do the same.
Mhm.
And then I stayed not so much for the standards, but rather for the other pillars of SMPTE, which are education and community, being able to help provide spaces for the nerdier bunch to gather and talk about the important work they do, but then also make it more of an intersection of the deep technical work and the creative work. There are organizations that sort of focus on the creative, like technical in service of creative. And I think that SMPTE, everything's merging so much. The meaning of motion picture and television is not even the same. And there's something to be reckoned with there. I mean, YouTube surpassed living room viewing. So now it's like
Right.
all these different ways you can create and you can experience media need to be brought together. And so I wanted to come in also to kind of bring that perspective. It's not just TV and film, and in fact TV and film is sort of shrinking. So how do we bring in all these other aspects and be really the central hub of developing frameworks that will serve, creative and technical professionals?
You see, the reason I find that interesting is because coming from being a Foley artist and then Foley editor and ADR editor, and then sometimes leading loop groups and being a voice actor, so that mine was all the performative side of it, but working with sound editors and then mixers for years and years and years. Um, I wasn't interested in SMPTE, but I was in Motion Picture Sound Editors and Cinema Audio Society. That's mixers and editors. And so I guess I was really fascinated that you went with the audio engineers, which is SIFTY, because those three organizations are addressing it from such a different perspective. And I always thought that was fascinating. And I remember that one of the things that we talked about is when I was working on the film, my short film at Ball State, working with my students on conversation with women in film sound, amplified with women in film sound. And that's how I first started talking to you, because we were both thinking about empowering women who were involved in film sound. That you were in the audio engineering part of it when in truth you're interested in the art and creativity of it. So
Mhm.
that fascinated me because that I knew a lot of people in SMT and they were really more like the audio engineering nerd types. And I know a couple of people that are both in editorial and SMT, actually more than a few. But I was really kind of astonished by that. I thought that was interesting. And that brings me to a different question. That's really sort of a bold position for a young woman to take, which makes me think that you are rather fearless in what it is that you're going to try to do.
I like that. I've been called a lot of names. Fearless is something, firebrand, and then some other names we won't mention. But um, I,
We don't
you
really
know,
care about those because those are the
no,
people that don't understand that women belong having a seat at every table. So we don't.
yes, yeah. It's certainly been interesting to sort of like go forward in that path. Because you get a lot of very interesting questions like, oh, do you think you got your job because you're a woman? Or, oh, do you think you're noticing you because you're the only one? I'm like, well, maybe. But I got it. So whatever. I yeah, I got sick of it. I was like, I don't want to be in this career if this is how it's going to be.
Right,
And my first dipping of the toe into kind of, upsetting the way of things was I wrote an article on Creative Cow after I went to my first NAB show, the National Association of Broadcasters. And I was like, oh, there are like no women here. And if they are scanning badges and doing, they're hired to exist as women and not as equals. And I wrote how that's sort of a reflection of the problem in our industry because if you go to these spaces and you only see women doing this sort of non-technical or non-participatory work, then you're going to bring that home with you. And so if we need to solve this issue of representation at trade shows but also in every other space where there are technical things happening.
right.
And it caused a real stir because I called some companies out by name, and for their to their
Oh,
credit,
good
they
for
they
you. Good for you.
to their credit, they did shift. And, there are very many fewer, women on display being objectified. It's a lot more equal. And people have taken notice of that. And, that was certainly scary too. And I talked with a mentor at the time for a couple months while I was trying to write it to say, is this the right time in my career to be doing this? Because it was about 12 years ago. It was sort of still me on the cusp, but it was just the right time. I was like, let's just do it. Screw
Mhm.
it. And it turned into actually really positive thing. It led into actually Adobe reaching out and wanting to sponsor a panel at the next NAB show about women and gender inequality in post-production. And the person that introduced the panel is now my current boss. So it's
Wow.
all very connected. And people, of course, you've had people reach out or say things that are less educated or outright mean. It's usually just a lack of understanding. But I've had many more people reach out and say, I'm so glad you did that.
Yeah.
So I've taken calculated risks in that way, but also I've really kind of stepped up behind women that have done a lot of the hard work too and just haven't been as visible.
I have to say it kind of reminds me a little bit of what it was like, what I was like, only the years were different because in the 80s and 90s, which is when I was pushing in, and it was harder because there were very few women, and I was not a pushy person, but certainly assertive and thinking that I had a right to try things. It's always interesting. I think it's a little easier now for women, but it really is interesting how there's just an assumption. There's so many assumptions made when you're a woman. And then I'm small, I'm only 5'2". And so that adds a whole nother, they
Mm.
diminish you a little bit and make you small in a lot of ways when you're little. And it never stops. It just never stops. You just find different ways of navigating it. I often say to people, because I became an endowed chair, which is a pretty high up thing to be at a university. But I even said to people, even now, when a woman walks into a room with a meeting and she looks around and she sees a bunch of men, she's going, okay, I have to figure out how to navigate. Oh, that one is perfectly comfortable dealing with women. That one feels threatened by women in positions of authority or power. This one, oh boy, that one's going to be trouble. Oh, that one's a friendly face. You have to go through the whole list of how they all operate. But when a man walks into a room of meeting, they're not thinking about that at all. They're just sitting down and doing their meeting. And it's such a different experience with women. And I also think it's different with women who are tall as opposed to women who are small. I have asked this of tall women, and they have a very different experience. And I know you're taller than I am. And I think I might have even asked you that question once when we met for coffee, because I am always aware that taller women have a very different way of walking into a room and dealing with things than those of us that are little. So now I want to get to the next piece, which I think is fascinating, that I think people will find interesting. And that is that you came on the scene in LA when you went to work for Get Ready Everybody Netflix. So I'd like to hear a bit about that journey because you came from Indiana and you didn't start knocking on doors and go, "Hi, my name is Kylee Pena and I would really like to work here. Can I get you coffee?" You just went, "Hi, okay, I work at Netflix." So tell us how that happened.
Yeah, I actually came to LA via Atlanta, so I had to take the long way around. And
That's right. I'd forgotten that piece.
yeah, I was an editor there, and that was where I kind of got burned out on editing. When you work for the wrong people, sometimes that
Oh,
sort
wait
of
a
saps
minute.
your
So how did
energy.
you end up going to Atlanta then? Because I don't know this story.
Yeah, I ended up going to Atlanta because I was chronically online, but it was, 2012, 2013 when being online was not as, like it is today. I knew the only way to get out of Indiana, especially post recession or during a recession, would be, who you know. The industry is all about who you know, and certainly nobody was hiring based on applications. So I made a lot of connections over the internet, and then going to events, trade shows, anywhere I could hustle my way in as someone who is getting paid a little above minimum wage and work and sleep on floors in hotel rooms. And that was when I was able to put, Twitter handles with faces and say, "Hey, I'm a real person." And I was blogging, I was just very present. And I got a job offer for a role in Atlanta in-house for a very small editing facility. So I went there and started cutting a PBS series called This American Land. And it was great. It was like dream material to work on, but it was like not a super great overall working environment. And so I ended up pivoting into workflow technology while I was there because it turns out there's a lot of movies and TV that are being shot in Atlanta
Oh yeah.
and
I
dailies
was
are
there
done
at the
near
same
site.
I was there at
Yeah.
the same time. I was
Hmm.
at Georgia State doing my PhD at the same time.
Yeah, I was where I wanted to go was to work on TV and film, like high end. And
Yeah.
so I knew that being in Atlanta would get me closer, even if I was working on these much smaller shows. And through networking, volunteering in the industry, probably using up way more of my free time than I realistically should have for my own emotional well-being, I made some friends. And when the facility that I was working at said, "Hey, we're in danger of closing," I was like, "Peace out. I'm going over here." And I went to work for a company that did dailies and workflow, doing dailies, and then was like, "Okay, my contract is out here. I'm going to LA. It's now or never." So I went across, drove across the country to LA and continued to work in dailies another 3 years before Netflix knocked on my door. Or
But
rather, I knocked on their door first.
okay, so how did that happen? Because I'm sure people would say, well, how did you get into something as amazing as Netflix? Because that was, it's still doing really interesting stuff, but
Hmm.
back at that time, it's really
Yeah.
revolutionizing things.
It was certainly really on the upswing. It was a really amazing time to be there. But the way I got in was the one single time that I have played the card of reaching out to a friend and asking them to ask their friend to refer me. I that's the literally the only time I've ever done that because I knew my friend did ran a post facility that did a lot of Netflix's work, and I was like, can we do a little bit of telephone game here. And they did. And she looked at my resume and brought me in. And it was for a role that I thought I'd be really good at. And they passed on me. But I stayed in touch with the hiring manager. And about 8 months later, at a SIMPTY event, I continued to stay extremely present. So I'm just around all the time. He saw me and he was like, "Hey, I'm hiring for a different role and I would like to talk to you." So it was at that event where we reconnected. And then, yeah, from there, it was a pretty easy process to get in because he already knew me. He already interviewed me. It was just, more about the process from there.
And your role, what were you doing there so that we can start connecting dots for people about what it was you
Yeah.
were doing? Because you've been doing some editing and dailies and in Atlanta, and then you did that in
Mhm.
LA, and then you started doing what at Netflix?
I came in as a coordinator for the creative technologies team. And really, what I did was I was a program manager. So, the creative technologies team was in charge of all the technology that creatives would touch in order to produce a show. So, we had experts, subject matter experts on our team that did camera technology, color, visual effects, animation. Like, we were the brain trust and thought leadership hub. And we would drive initiatives forward, like trying to get every show to produce in HDR in Dolby Vision and opt out instead of having to opt in. And then later on, I was managing a project where we were doing the same thing with Dolby Atmos because we could set up a process where if they would deliver Atmos to us, we could derive the other audio deliverables from that and really save people time and money. But of course, the audio mixers delivering that stuff have to be happy with our derivations. So it's
Okay.
like a very, very deep process. And it goes to show the amount of creative empathy that was needed. Because if you just have engineers and you're working on, X, Y, and Z directly with creatives, they're not going to say the right thing. They're not going to understand. We would bring engineers from the headquarters in Los Gatos down and give them tours of Paramount and stuff. And they'd be like, "Oh, so this is why you guys are the way you are." I'm like, yeah, the movie industry is a whole thing. And there's a hierarchy and there's a language
Yeah.
and there's a vibe. And you just kind of have to match it and keep going. So I was in the center of all that, helping to run this team. My manager ran it, and then I was sort of his right hand person to keep everything going and push certain things, certain initiatives that were really important forward, like the audio one.
So you were there quite a while, and I remember visiting you
Mhm.
there a couple of times, and then I know that you went and decided to get a master's over at USC.
I
Because you
did.
wanted to, because you're a slacker and you really don't do much. And so you decided to go to USC and work on a master's degree. And
Hmm.
the reason that I'm doing all of this, it's not like this is a show where we go, and then what did you do? And then what did you do? It's that this is about how people understand how you can keep moving and changing what you're doing because there are so many different ways to go in the industry where you can see how something connects to something else and move into a different place.
Hmm.
And so you started seeing, because we're going to get to this idea that you wanted to talk about that I think is really important about empowering creativity in people and not through the typical means and having it be, which is kind of a common theme in the discussions I have with a lot of people in the industry. It's not always about the tools.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So
absolutely.
when you went to USC, there was a particular program you were interested
Hmm. Yes. When I was at Netflix, I got really interested in product management, design, development, design thinking, because that was the first time I really got to do hands-on work with that. Working directly with product teams. I was on the side of Netflix that was studio driven, but since we worked on creative technologies, there was a lot of crossover with managing internal tools and really thinking from like a user perspective, user centric design and iterating and learning. And I was really intrigued by that and read a lot of books and ended up in grad school at USC at the Ivan and Young Academy. It was the Master's in Integrated Design, Business, and Technology. And
Mhm.
how they describe that, because it's quite a mouthful, is it's sort of like a 21st century MBA, they say. It has a cross section of everything. And usually people that show up have expertise in one particular area and then go to complement or go to learn about the other two to complement that. So it was really product design thinking, innovation, and entrepreneurship focused. Entrepreneurship, whether you were you were going to do a startup, or, entrepreneurship within a large organization, which is tends to be more my thing.
Hmm.
And I got a lot of opportunity there to try things out outside of the industry with tools and things
Huh.
like that, like consulting for brands like Fisher Price, doing physical design work as well. And that was interesting because it kind of showed me it's all kind of the same principles. So when I wanted to pivot to what's next, I was thinking it makes the most sense for me to work on tools that I have a deep expertise on.
Hmm.
And of course, Adobe was one of my very first, I mean, it was my first choice. So I emailed my current boss and I was like, hey, I think I want to pivot. And I think actually product marketing management is the right thing, which is what she obviously had been doing for a long time. And I was like, hey, I think that might be right because I'm a communicator, but I'm also a product expert. So there's like a combination. And she said, don't talk to anyone else. I have to go to a trade show. When we come back, we're going to talk. So that was when I was able to join Adobe, working on Premiere Pro, but also on all other tools within digital video and audio.
So, how do you incorporate audio into what it is you're doing? Since I like to explore the various things that, I mean, I'm about all the performative aspects of sound. And I have to tell you, Kylee, I've been talking to people all over the world, and there are so many things going on with performative sound. And what I mean by that is not just plugging in and having a computer um, do it for you, but where they are creating, it could be through a computer, but there's the creative aspect of using it to create and do a performance of it. It's just amazing using AI and using sound separated from image or putting it with image, but in a different way. I mean, there's just so much going on because people are becoming much more, young people, especially open-minded into all the different things they can do. And I focus more on Foley, but it goes in a lot of different directions. So in what you're doing, how does the sound part enter into it?
The sound part of designing for Premiere Pro has been a big aspect of a product focus because we're trying to develop a tool that is really great for someone that does every part of the workflow. And I say that not because we're developing a tool for an editor that is just like a wear all the hats kind of a person. Certainly we are, but every editor that produces video that other people have to watch will at this point touch all aspects because
Right.
the expectation for works in progress has become such that it has to look and sound finished at every moment, or people get super distracted. There's just too many screens in our lives, and
That's true.
we're just too used to certain levels of quality from everything. And also, if you've ever worked with a producer, they get distracted by every little thing. So removing all those distractions helps people focus on the story, and then removing the cognitive load of having to figure out how to get it to sound right is also really important because I'm sure with performative sound, there is an aspect of having to do some work to maybe mix it around or clean it up or help the environment sound better.
Mhm.
But we want people to focus on the performance or the story or the actual what you're trying to do with that sound
Mhm.
rather than hunting around and figuring out like, oh, do I put this, EQ this and, compressor that? Like, that's all really important. And you certainly can do that stuff in Premiere Pro. But I want editors to be able to just flow through it and get into the creative rhythm and then do the fine tuning later when they're ready to focus on those things, if
Uh-huh.
that makes sense. So a lot of what we've been focusing on is things that are reducing the amount of like dragging the mouse around, reducing clicks, and using AI to automate some of the things that are just not creative at all, like putting in keyframes to duck music under audio, for example. Like
Wow.
that's just annoying.
Yeah. And so people would be using this for various different kinds of projects because I'm trying to
Hmm.
imagine all the different ways people use this because I get stuck into my little world of what it is I
Yeah.
do. So tell me various ways people would use this.
I mean, people edit feature films in it. So they'll use, for example, loudness matching for their production audio. Of course, the audio is going to go to somebody for actual final finishing and mixing. But sometimes the mic on set might be quiet, some of the mics not be the same level. And instead of having to go through a whole scene and do it, you
Yes.
can just highlight it and use AI to do loudness matching. So that helps speed up that part of the workflow because you're not going to keep that work anyway. But then in corporate, like I worked in corporate video, I shot my own stuff. I know how much I messed up on the mic placement, and you can use like an AI tool like enhanced speech to improve to reduce the noise and make it sound professional. So people use it for really short things, super long things, all sorts of environments. It's sort of like the utility where you can just throw things in and get going, and then you can build on that, and it'll help you build on that later.
Did you have to do some particular training with AI in order to incorporate all of this into your knowledge already?
Oh, like education?
Or was it
No.
just hands-on training while you were working?
This is all of my AI knowledge has been hands-on training and also a little bit in grad school. It was a really weird and interesting time to be in a program that focused on innovation because it was so I graduated in, oh my gosh, 2023. Yes, 2023. So I was there at 21 and 23. And when I started, I was trying to create a capstone project that was around guiding people to tell better stories with their slideware. And I wanted to incorporate a lot of AI. And at the time, my professors were like, it's not going to be ready for years. You have to pivot. And then by the end, when I was presenting my final project, my criticism was, why didn't you incorporate more AI? And I was like, oh my gosh, every semester was so different. It was just a wild, wild time.
Yeah.
But yeah, a lot of my base knowledge came probably from grad school, one class about exponential technologies where things can just really take off. And then from there, just talking to the professor and saying, how the heck do I keep up on this? And the best way that I've learned is to read a lot and then try to explain it to people. So I've done that with SMPTE a lot, where I'm like, oh, I'm going to do a presentation on the intersection of AI and Web3. I'm not a deep expert, but I can go and tell you what I have found and what is interesting, and we can go from there with a conversation. But that's really interesting. If anyone says they're an expert with any of this stuff, they're kind of not.
Yeah. So did you think that do you perceive yourself as a primarily technological person?
I I struggle to say that I'm primarily technical or technological. I think I'm certainly driven by that mindset, but people try to put you in a box as technical or creative when the reality is that when I left pure creative work of editing, like picture editing, I felt like I was doing way more creative problem solving in dailies or at Netflix or even now, like in picture editing, there's a lot of really interesting problems, but they're sort of all clustered around the same ideas.
Mhm.
But then you're in dailies and it's midnight, and a cinematographer has decided to use a camera with firmware that your software doesn't support. And so now you have to think, how am I going to get this file into the computer, processed, and then delivered by 9 a.m. so I don't get yelled at by an executive producer at Universal?
Right.
It's like a
Right.
different kind of problem solving, but it's one that I really enjoy because it involves the technical and the creative aspect because you're also thinking about all that, but also dealing with the people side of it and the
Yeah.
the empathy for the people that are handling the work.
This is really a lot for me to wrap my brain around because it's not a strength of mine to think in terms of the technology, but I do want to pivot into another interest of yours. You belong to a lot of different organizations, and I know that one thing that's a passion for you is empowering women,
Mhm.
which is also a passion for me. And one of the reasons it became important to me is because when I was coming up, what I noticed was women weren't really helping women very much. And when I was young, I got a lot of help from men, and it wasn't the kind of help that a lot of people would think, which was, hey, baby, kind of casting couch help. It was really serious. You seem really talented at this, and you seem really smart. And I really want to help you because, as you know, our industry is really eager to help people that want to work hard and have ability and are smart and will and talented. And in a way, it's more democratic probably than other industries, because even though there is a tendency to marginalize women in some ways, there are a lot of men who are really eager to help women who are on the ball. And I found that I didn't get a lot of help from other women as I was coming up. And so I decided that I was going to be one of those women that definitely empowered women, and not just women, but men too, but that I really did look out for the women who I could help. And I know that that's something that you like to do. So I'd like to hear a little bit about that passion of yours and your mission in that area, because I think that that's something that we are really seeing more and more needs to be a part of what our industry does. And it's something that a lot of younger women are really finding is important.
Mhm. Yeah, I make it a point to go out of my way to answer emails and messages specifically from women, because not because I am ignoring men by any chance. Like, it's more of a triage situation, but anytime a young woman, a student reaches out to me, I make every effort to connect back with them, because not a lot of people did that for me. And I know the data shows that men are more likely to engage with young men because they see themselves in young men. Obviously, like, it's human nature to do that. So I'm trying to play the play the numbers and be realistic with my time. Any student that reaches out to me, I almost always connect with them. But if I have to make decisions, I will reach out to young women that I see that were in predicaments that I was in, because I want them to know that when they do hit issues where maybe other women aren't helping them, or they're being perceived a certain way,
Mhm.
that it's probably not them. It took me to my mid-20s to realize that it was a collective experience. So that's really important to me. I I try to, in any space I occupy, I try to bring up the fact that, who is missing from this room? Why? What's the divide? Like, what did you do to go out of your way to make sure that there were women speaking on this panel? And I have declined to be on panels that where I was going to be the only woman, because I'm not going to be the
Huh.
token anymore. So the best and easiest thing to do is to speak up. But outside of that, I am part of organizations that support women. Outside of the industry, I'm part of Junior League of Los Angeles. It's an organization of women that develops women as leaders through training them to be volunteers and nonprofit leaders and other leaders. And I'm currently in senior leadership with them as a communications vice president. So I'm bringing in my communication skills to train women on how to do that, while also getting training on how to run a team and a nonprofit. And we go out and we support especially young people and young mothers and those that are transitioning out of foster youth, because that is also an area where a lot of particularly young women fall into the system and get lost through the cracks. So we put a lot of work into all that, but overall, I am the one who speaks up, and I actually At Netflix, I talked to my manager about that. I was like, I don't want to be like the one woman that talks about how there's no women here. I don't want to be the token diversity girl. And he was like, you're right. I need to do that too.
Yeah.
So that was the other thing, is training allies to speak up on your behalf, because they have a little more social currency to spend in that regard, where other people might get sick of hearing me. I've got, allies that are going to speak up as well. So I I try to spread myself all over the place anywhere I can, just being very present and being loud and reaching out to young women that I see from smaller towns or who are trying to make it, and say, yeah, you're not the only one. We're here.
I'm gonna make sure that we put up your website information for people.
Yeah.
One thing that I have noticed over the years, especially since a lot of younger women know me, a lot of academics who write now, a lot of people are writing about different things, aspects of Foley and using Foley in a lot of things. And my book gets cited in everything. My book, The Holy Grail, gets cited just everywhere, apparently, especially overseas,
Mm.
because there's just not a lot. I was the very first person to really write about Foley. And so, because nobody had written about it, nobody had written about the history, it was it. It was like there was nothing. And what I find is the tendency towards women to not have faith in their own sense of self and their own personal power. And I have noticed that, and of course you are different in that respect, but I do notice that a lot with women, and especially younger women, but a lot of women where they don't feel a sense of confidence about their right to be in the space or their own personal power. And that's something I'm always working on, to help them recognize that they are really brilliant, or they really are worthy, or what they did was really wonderful, or they really had a really good point when they said something. Because I think in the culture, there's just so much of just ignoring or not noticing or marginalizing or dismissing what women say. And it goes along with talking over women.
Mm-hmm.
And there is a tendency so much in groups, and I'm sure you've noticed it. And I don't like it when it happens to me, and I try to speak up. And then things are said about us when we speak up and say, please don't speak over me, or please, you just interrupted me. But there is a tendency in meetings dominated by men to talk over a woman when she's trying to speak, or to finish her sentences for her, or assume you know what she's going to say, or to actually take over her idea and then take credit for it. It is amazing that this still goes on. And so, one of the things that I think really matters is always empowering women by reminding them that their ideas have value, and that they actually have more value than they think they do.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Yeah, I think like a lot of people will say, oh, women are just by nature less confident. And I'm like, no, we're not. It's a socialized response that a lot of young women will have. You go into a space and you're the only one that looks like you, and you're told a certain thing. And
Mhm.
even if you see another woman there, she might have the only woman in the room syndrome and treat you like crap. So there's a lot of things that socialize you to take a step back and tell you you're not supposed to be here. So as I've risen up in my career, I have tried to hold space for those women, and knowing that first second year in their career, they don't always have the safety to speak up, but I do. So I'm going to not to stick up for them, but I'm going to say it from my perspective and make a big deal out of, hey, like, can we, like, you keep talking over me or whatever, show the example, and then talk to them one on one whenever I can as well. I've found that just being the example in the space of how you show up when you have the safety to do so and use your voice on behalf of people that can't really does change the tone. And over time, I've seen women, younger women that have been on my team, grow because they see that's how you can and should act. And it's not every moment is going to be a win. Sometimes it's
No.
not, it's going to be a really sour, awkward conversation, but the long term of that is really important. So I really agree with that. I
Yeah.
hate when people talk over women, and I feel like remote work has made that really interesting because on at least on Microsoft Teams, when you look at a meeting recap, you can see how long everyone spoke in that meeting. And there's the perception that when women speak, half as much, they dominate the conversation when
Uh-huh.
in fact they're not. And now we have the data to show who is talking, and we could be like, you talked 80% of that. Did you need to? I'm just asking.
Yeah. Yeah. Um, this is a really interesting conversation, and I'm glad that you actually said that because I I'm always astonished at the response that a lot of men will have that a woman is talking a lot when in reality she might have said something that might have triggered something in them, but not said very much at all compared to how much the men talk.
Mm-hmm.
So it's something that we're still paying attention to. But for me, as I'm getting older, I'm thinking the one thing I really care about is getting these women to realize that their voice matters. So I think we're both really cognizant of that. Um, well, this is wonderful. I'd love to speak with you again in the future. I think
Absolutely.
there's more to say and more to do as you do more, as you do other things. We'll do more of this, and I want to thank you for being with me today because it had been on my mind for a while that we should do a session. It sounds like we did like a yoga session or a facial session, but
Therapy.
this was great. This your work is fascinating, and I'm going to have to ruminate on how some of it works because it is more technological than what I'm used to. But with the advent of AI, it's bringing in a whole complexion of things that we're not used to. And while we have to be careful not to let it take over things that it shouldn't take over, it's really been very beneficial
Mhm.
in some ways that I'd never thought of. For example, I have a GoFundMe up right now to help finance a piece of what I'm doing for a musical I wrote to get some money in, and we used AI to put up a picture of representation of the show because I didn't want to use a real person, and it was about a Foley artist. And I thought, boy, this is magnificent because nobody has to be singled out. And it looked very natural and real and wonderful. And I thought, this is a wonderful use of AI. And it's not something I would have thought of because I don't think like that. So there are some marvelous uses for it that I think a lot of us are only now starting to think about.
That's the angle I'm trying to continue to take when it comes to like Premiere Pro and Adobe products. How do you bring AI? AI has been in the product for 10 years, but then we're in generative AI where we're making new pixels.
Right,
How do we bring that in a way that actually solves something that you don't want to do anyway?
right,
And so, Generative Extend is a tool we introduced earlier this year in beta, where you can drag the edge of a frame when you don't have enough to hit the beat of the music or to do a transition and just add a few more frames, and it generates them seamlessly. But the use that really got me and got me as a believer early on before we even developed anything was being able to extend the audio. If you don't have any room tone, doesn't matter. You can drag the audio, add 10 seconds, and it'll
wow,
drag the room tone out. I saw a demo of that and I was like, okay, picture, that's cool. I mean, that's really it's magical, but the audio, I was like,
yeah,
wow. And it works with sound effects too. You can extend sound effects that get trimmed off because, you're running and gunning and you had to turn off your recorder or the battery died.
yeah,
But it's pretty remarkable being able to salvage, no room tone and be able to make your mix sound right
yeah,
instead of having to go through and find like a few little patches and put them all together and create your
yeah,
own little quilt of, of room
yeah,
tone. It's pretty magical. So I'm
astounding.
excited to do more stuff like that.
Well, thank you so much. This has been great. It's wonderful to speak with you, and we'll do more in the future.
Great. Looking forward to it. Thanks.